Hello everyone.
Hello.
So, video number two. That we're about to do. By the way, we are sitting on a blue couch, if you can't see that, in, where are we? Jeffreys
Gideon
Bay.
and Jessica's house.
Yeah, Gideon and Jessica's house in Jeffreys Bay. We've just done a pastoral approaches, which went really well with a group of pastors. Exciting news to see that that's growing. Just some notes before we go into this video to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. You may have watched the video from the last time, but if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you won't get an automatic reminder of the next videos. So it's really useful to do that. We have discovered that you need a Gmail account or a G Suite account. So if there's any issues with subscribing, please just email Megan and she can help you sort that out. Then also, we really do want you to put comments, questions and suggested topics in the comments section of the YouTube video. We want to start a debate going around these topics that we're talking about so that it's not just the two of us talking, to really get you included. And we really want to know what questions come up for you, because that'll stir our own thoughts around future videos that would be relevant for you. So please make sure that you do that for us. We really do want that input. Great, so on to this video. Cindy is going to just give a bit of a brief description of the previous video and then we'll go from there.
Cool. So just in looking at the previous video again, one of the cool things that we did speak about kind of as an anchoring topic was what it means to be a good coordinator, and basically how that is being a disciple, yes, but also discipling, and in that, the light's gone funny. It's very light, sorry.
A brief interruption. Cindy was distracted. Carrying on.
In that it's stewarding relationships well, and because I'm a coordinator, there's almost an extra level of responsibility in stewarding relationships well. And then based on that, well, if that is the key thing, or a key defining feature, what does that mean in terms of my growth? How do I grow in that? Because I think for me, core to journey is being in a constant process of growth and change and whatever with God, as it kind of feeds into relationship with others.
Right. And so I think as we were reflecting on that, that whole thing that you're saying about coordinator synonymous with being a disciple, we were wondering just what would be the first step in that for a coordinator to grow in. And I think it's a natural step to take that actually that means first me and God. So what we're planning to do over the next few videos is look at me and God, me and others, me and journey, me and team,
yes,
and me and journey.
And we didn't speak about me and myself.
That's true. So hopefully we'll pick that up, and certainly as we're going through this one, I think me and myself will be something that we'll talk about a lot. Yeah. We had an idea around a link-in then to this topic, which is me and God. So we're saying a coordinator is a disciple, therefore then into the topic of me and God, what was the link-in thought that we had?
And so part of our linking thought was that really often, obviously in ourselves and in other people, we see how when crisis hits, there's almost my reaction is to stop the crisis, wanting other people to fix, wanting other people to change. And I know that's something that I've done a lot, is if they would change, then I would feel better, or I would feel safer, rather than my first response should be going to God. So if this would change or that would change or that would change, my life would be easier, rather than God, this is what's happening to me, change me, which is exactly that thing that everything that happens is just fodder for my relationship with God and should drive me there to Him.
Right, right. So it's almost like what we see in one another and in coordinators is in the moment where it should count the most, me and God isn't there. It's like I catch up afterwards as a coordinator. So maybe I eventually get there, but initially me and God isn't there. It's me in the crisis. At this point, I just had a thought to say that what we don't want to do is put a big heavy on one another in terms of kind of trying to drive a spiritual law, but more just reflecting on, for many of us, we've walked a journey with God for a number of years, and yet I think for most of us, if not all of us, there's still a manifestation of immature responses, and this is one of them. So when crisis hits, like you're saying, it's just my automatic response is to go into the crisis and try and resolve it.
And I think that thing of my response is going into the crisis. I try to fix it, and God becomes the last resort.
Yes.
Rather, or I don't cry to God. I cry to, for me, I cry to accountability. I cry to friends. I cry to whoever will listen, rather than cry to God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Making me blush a little. So, yeah.
And so that led us to a next thought in building this discussion, and that was, well, is there a fundamental building block that's missing? Like when I think about, so crisis comes and I just automatically react, that's kind of what you would expect as a characteristic. It sounds terrible to say this to all of us, as a characteristic of someone who's coming to a journey program for the first time. They're in a crisis and they just keep on going from crisis to crisis, and so then eventually they just think, oh, there's just so much crisis, I need help. Because they don't recognize their need. And that's what we start with them, is to help them to recognize that there's an underlying unmet need that drives the crisis.
Chapter 1.
Yeah, and so then why is it that we're still doing that? So as we've been reflecting on that, it's like, no, but we think that there's a missing building block for us. Or we're aware of the building block and we may be engaging in it, but we're not slotting it into the right part of the foundation. And so what has that been that we've been talking about, that building block?
Well, I think it is that thing of acknowledging my need, going to Him and crying out to Him, recognizing that He's the only one really who I can go to. Was a thought popping up there, but now I can't remember it. Anyway, so it's thinking about the Beatitudes, because this is what the kingdom is really. This is what living blessed in as a Christian looks like. It's being poor in spirit, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, being persecuted, mourning, like not the nice, jolly kind of prosperity gospel stuff at all. It's quite the contrary. And so really, and I think by definition, my walk of, or the start of my relationship as a child of God begins in acknowledging my brokenness and my need.
Right.
Unless I come to that place, I wouldn't cry out to Him for salvation, you know. And so it is not a theoretical concept in the manual in chapter 1, but it's like, is that kind of one of my starting point in relationship with God, and is that something that I keep going to? Is that part of my God cycle rather than my addictable sin cycle, really? Is do I go back to that place, always acknowledging my need, and even when I don't know, I just know that something's not okay, so do I go back to Him rather than anywhere else, or taking matters into my own hand and trying to fix it or change it?
So, bear with me as I respond to you in this. When you say all of that as a basic building block, I just feel overwhelmed, right? And I think maybe that's part of what happens for us. We're saying, what is the starting point? And we're saying, maybe that starting point keeps getting missed for all of us. And I then get overwhelmed by beatitudes, acknowledging my need, like all of this stuff. I just feel like, oh my word, I don't even know where to start thinking about that. So maybe to take us a step back, in part of what we've been talking out is the basic starting point is conversation with God, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks for that. Throwing me under the bus. No, I'm joking. But I mean, yeah, well, apart from conversation with God, relationship with God, like all of this is null and void.
Yeah.
So that is the basic, and that's the container in which everything else rests. Really.
Yes. So like if I'm not speaking to God, I don't have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
Can we extend it? And maybe that's a topic for another conversation. But if I'm therefore then not listening to God, I'm not really in a relationship with Him. So it's like I'm just speaking at Him.
Yeah. And often the speaking at Him is driven more by anxiety and fear and all of that.
Yes.
Like I always use that thing that you told me when I was seeing you for counselling, how I pray for things that I already have, because I keep saying, give me your peace, God, give me your peace, God, rather than receiving.
Thank you.
So it's like speaking at Him rather than actually also receiving what He says,
right,
and integrating that into me.
Right. And I think that connects to what we're reflecting on in what we see as a characteristic in us as coordinators often, that a crisis comes, and crises really either reveal to us how well we're practicing that conversation with God, or they're uncovering what's missing. And so instead of reflexively going and speaking what we feel out to God and then receiving Him in that moment, what we do is we come and speak at one another, and we expect everyone to just make us feel better, right? And then we just look like these immature Christians who haven't really actually grown up. While at the same time we're teaching people, or supposed to be teaching people, how to live through that wrestle with God. So we're saying, as a step forward in the conversation, what the basic building block is as a disciple is learning how to have conversation with God, but learning how to have meaningful, intentional, growing conversation with God that actually facilitates intimate relationship, and that intimate relationship with Him transforms me.
So it is that conversation is the core and the fuel and the outworking of the fuel.
Yeah. And so maybe that's like, okay, duh, we should all have that. But right, and the reason why we're having this conversation now as a starting point is because actually we're wondering how many of us realize that that's what we're teaching people in the first 5 chapters of Jen, is how to have intentional, meaningful conversation with God where it counts, and in that then learning to receive Him in that conversation as He responds to us in such a way that transforms us.
And so basically what you're saying is then first 5 chapters are breaking down step by step how to relate to God and hear Him.
Yes.
And live in that space.
Yes. Yet I wonder how many of us actually think that the first 5 chapters, have we actually even contemplated it? That we end up thinking that the first 5 chapters are about identifying crises and fixing them with God. Because that's always going to lead us back to the problem, which is another crisis and another crisis. It's not that. It's recognizing that God is wanting to teach us the rhythm of talking with Him and receiving Him, and that crises are the most powerful, one of the most powerful things to facilitate that rhythm of learning how to live every day with Him in this conversation that's changing us.
Well, as you speak about that, though, then in a way what we teach in the first 5 chapters is all about how mothers have wounded us, how our fathers have wounded us, what Jesus did at the cross, what the Holy Spirit does in us, rather than kind of we are wounded, but this is where we go, right? we need the voice of a father, but this is where we go. So all the time pointing back at Jesus, or do we stop at mothers, fathers? It sounds weird to stop at Jesus, but how do I then live in the truth of that? So it's all the time bringing it back to, this is about me and God. This is about how I relate to Him.
Right.
Yeah. And so our teaching stops short because our practice of it and our understanding of it even maybe stops short.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are not anchoring deep enough into that practice of prayer conversation with God that looks like that. Yes, that looks like you said, when whatever we've got going on in our hearts and in our lives that may be triggering more in our hearts, we come to Him and we receive Him. And in the experience of receiving Him, which we've all had, but this is about like connect with that awareness. The more we receive Him, the more we're able to endure and persevere in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, etc. Right?
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And so that it is as I go there, I'm transformed.
Yes.
Because I'm going there, not because I'm trying to get the fruits of Cindy.
Yes. And this, and we're saying this is the essential foundation. That's why we're teaching people, Christians, in a discipleship process. We're teaching them this, and we're trying to teach them that in the most volatile, struggle parts of their lives, because that's where it counts most. And in learning to live that way with God there, I'm able to live with God there everywhere. Yes, you get that. Yeah.
And so the earliest crises would be around mother and father. So let's just go there as a way to kind of engaging, well, this is how we live with God.
Yes. And so what we've tried to do, and Cindy's going to talk that through, and then we can just discuss it briefly, because we don't want to go over time here. See, we're already up to 17 minutes. Is to just summarize how we see that rhythm of conversation with God being taught in the first 5 chapters. Yeah.
Okay. So, we've alluded to how chapter 1 speaks about acknowledging need. And even when we don't know our need, we can still go to Him with our need to know what our need is.
Yes.
Craig remembered that, which New Living Translation
That's
speaks about their translation of Matthew 5 verse 3 is, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for Him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And so it is that thing of just going to Him, even if I don't know what my need is. I even need Him to show me what my need is. So that would be the chapter 1 kind of thing.
And again, to emphasize that that's what we're teaching people, is that that's a daily practice. It's something that I have to learn to do every day.
Yeah.
Because a child needs to come every day and be fed.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah. And so even if that becomes part of your wake-up connection with God, but the thing is then to take the time to listen.
Yes.
So that's kind of chapter 1. I don't know if you want to say anything.
No, that's good.
Then the chapter 2 part would be acknowledging that God is the source of my needs, and He's the satisfaction of my needs. And for there, Psalm 73 verse 25, it speaks about, who have I in heaven but you, and earth has nothing I desire apart from you. And so really He is, or He becomes my everything. He becomes the source of it, because the source drives me to the fulfillment of it. And in that, He's giving me what I need even to go to Him. Yes. And in that, He satisfies this need that He placed in me initially. Yes. Which is just so precious for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, understanding that what we're doing in chapter 2 and 3 is teaching people to recognize all the barriers to that.
Yeah.
So all the reasons that we set up in our hearts as to why we don't see God as our need, only so that they can be seen as deceptions and barriers, and that we're far more intentional of coming and saying, yes, God, you are my need.
Right.
Yeah.
The things that hinder and obscure that.
Yes.
It's good. And then the chapter 4 would be, how do I then go to him, humbling me, right, so that I'm able to receive him, so that I can hear and connect to his voice above everything that's happening in my head, all the thoughts, all the lies that I believe, but also above everything that I feel. That how is it that he or his voice does carry more authority almost than what's going on here or what's going on here. And so it is just focusing on Jesus and all that he is, all that he did, and how does that affect my life, or what are the implications of that for me. Yeah.
And obviously we're referring to confession in that chapter. But the focus, remember, of confession is that I would come and put down all of the things that are seemingly more important to me. Even my crises are now more important to me because they're controlling my heart and my mind and my choices. That I would receive him through Jesus as the one who meets me there and is enough for me. Yes. And I mean, one of the things that we were talking about in reflection was Psalm 23 verse 5, which is that part of the psalm that God says that he'll prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. And just an awareness that actually his feast is prepared in the midst of all of the turmoil. And that it's such a vivid description for me of that confession, because when I come in that moment of crisis, I am afraid to turn my back on it and look at him. It's not like I'm in joy and I can't wait for this feast. I'm anxious, I'm afraid, I'm shameful, I'm guilty. I have all of these emotions. And the last thing that I want to do is to turn my attention away from them. I want them fixed. I want to be protected from them. But he wants me to come and enjoy the feast.
And in a way, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why?
Yes.
Because you're with me.
Yes.
And so I'm walking through this. He's not promising to remove me from it.
Yes.
But even there, I can have no fear because of him. And so even as you're saying that, I think how much when I go to God in the midst of my crisis, that is a huge place of worship, because I literally am putting me to death. I'm putting the crisis off the throne and I'm putting him on the throne. And for me, that's an ultimate place of worship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to emphasize, but that's in the midst of trepidation. So like the valley of the shadow of death, I think when I face in life one day the reality that I will die, I'm going to be afraid of that. Like, I can't avoid that. But what we're doing here is we're saying that God is calling us in a conversation that is every day to that moment to learn how to choose him as the one who walks with me. So therefore then I can keep walking because I'm learning how to trust him. And maybe in that, and certainly at a point, certainly what will happen is my heart will find an experience of peace. But the goal isn't that I won't feel these things. The goal is learning to look at him and learning to choose him. And that's what I'm doing when I call someone in my small group to confess their sins, is that.
Yeah. And so confession really is how I take all of this that has consumed me and I put it there so that I can look at him.
Yes.
And choosing to look at him instead of that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that's chapter 4. And then chapter 5 is just that place of how I then, based on that, then crisis is no longer in control, right? I'm listening to him, I'm connecting with him, and so from that, what do I choose? Even if I'm forcing myself to choose it, what am I going to choose today to do that is completely, in alignment with what he says? Like Jesus only doing what he saw the Father do, and saying what he heard the Father say.
Right.
And so it's that thing of, I'm no longer dominated by that. I'm walking, I have peace in the midst of the crisis. And so how do I walk in the midst of the crisis?
Yes.
And just in a way that keeps me kind of, I heard someone once speak about how grace is a cloud, not the sky. And so how do I stay under the cloud rather than when I'm running around trying to sort my crisis out and I'm just all over the place. Yeah.
We could go off on a tangent there because that just excites me listening to that, because yes, that's exactly what God does with the Israelites through the desert, right? He represents himself as a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire in the midst of a massive desert and all of the armies coming against them. He is just this singularity, right? And they either are focusing on him and therefore then are not distracted by what's really terrifying and scary and vulnerable, or they're focused on the scary, terrified, vulnerable, and even though he's still there, they're like, oh, you're not doing everything for us. And that's what we're saying we're not getting at times.
And again, if they chose not to follow the cloud, they would die.
Yes.
That's kind of just how blatantly obvious the choice was, but for us it's often more subtle.
Yes.
So it's not like follow the cloud or you will die. It's like follow the cloud, or maybe you'll live, but maybe you'll sort out the crisis by yourself, kind of thing.
Yes. And all we're saying is that in chapter 5, what that highlights for us in that moment, so we come and we confess and we choose to see God in Jesus as the one who is our source, we then have to make a choice to walk focusing on him in that moment. And again, remember, crisis really heightens that awareness of that choice, because what I want to do is I want to say, like the Israelites, oh, but look, you don't love us. We have more than we had before. You're just like all of our parents. You're just like whatever, right? Like chapter 1's barriers, chapter 2 and 3's barriers come to the fore. And that's part of life, but actually that's the Holy Spirit's work in us to say, look at how much you want to make this, Craig, about feeling like you're getting more than you used to have. When I'm giving you all of me, choose me. Stop looking for something else and risk with me to walk through this struggle.
And in there, all of our idols and our desire for comfort and our desire for life of ease, even if it's in Egypt, just gets revealed.
Yes. Yes.
Which then means it just drives me back to him again.
Yes. So do you want to just unpack that last statement? It drives me back to him. So I'm thinking of how what we're talking about here is a cycle, and that the 5 chapters are teaching people a rhythm, not a path from a beginning to an end, but a rhythm.
And I think even just speak about that, I think I often then get stuck at that place. Easy to go into self-hatred because I just hate all this stuff in me, rather than the stuff just takes me, like, God, show me how much I need you, rather than all these things I want. So I then get stuck focusing on me and self-hatred and all that kind of stuff, rather than all of the stuff is just getting triggered so that I can bring it back into relationship with them, and then just start that whole process once again.
Right.
You know, and so it is really just that, the cycle of life with God.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
The circle of life.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking, but I'm like, I don't do Lion King. So, the cycle of life. So let me just see if there's anything.
Can I add to that? This is really exciting for me, even right now as we're talking about it, because so the moment I'm willing to recognize that God calls me in the midst of this to choose Jesus rather than escape from the crisis, I'm then confronted with how hard that is for me to do, because there's so many things that I want to choose or want him to give me rather than that, which is human. That's part of our crisis. Did God really say this? You could have all of this, right? Yet God wants to give me himself. And so that therefore then uncovers deeper need, chapter 1. That's what Cindy's saying. And so as a result of that, then the more I get that, the more I realize that that rhythm pushes me deeper into acknowledging my need, recognizing that you're the one that meets me in that need, humbling myself so that I would choose that. and therefore then aligning my will to say yes, and then therefore then what he'll do is he'll show me how hard it is to persevere in that because of me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as you speak as well, for me the thing is how I go thinking it's this need, and as I get more uncovered, I see, well, it's actually something. So initially it's, I want this crisis to disappear. Then it goes to, I actually want a life of ease. Then it goes to recognizing my selfishness. And so it's just this process almost of mining deeper and deeper and deeper.
And can I add, then somewhere along the line it goes to, okay, well, when will I be better? When will I be more holy?
Free.
When will I not, right? And yet that's not even God's goal.
Yeah.
More and more dependence.
Yeah.
And if I'm not letting him show me just how needy I am, even against myself, that dependence doesn't have a chance to grow.
Yeah. And my initial crying out to him often is to make me more whole, more holy, so that I have less need for him.
Yes.
Whereas as we go through this, just the depth of my need for him
Yes.
becomes more and more
Yes.
apparent. Yeah.
And so, dare I ask you this? Can we summarize then what we're saying is one of the basic fundamental building blocks of a disciple, and therefore then again, not as a law to coordinators, but as an encouragement to ones who are growing in maturity and have more responsibility to choosing this. What are we calling us to choose on a daily basis with God?
You want me to?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, it's calling on people to be utterly kind of broken before him, crying out to him, relating to him in a very raw and real way.
Yeah.
And relating as in conversation, two-way process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
In all of the stuff of life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so making it almost like the scriptures use this language. I need to feed on Jesus. I can't live on bread alone. Am I letting God grow it to that level that I realize that if I don't acknowledge my need every day, if I don't acknowledge the barriers in me to that need with God and accept him as the one who can meet that need, if I don't every single day allow him then to humble me in that confession process, that I would see him as the one and then have to align my will to choose that, and therefore then even let the Holy Spirit show me the barriers in that, I'm not learning how to feed on the bread of life. I'm not learning how to drink the living water that quenches my thirst. I'm not actually learning to do that. And in the next crisis that hits, I'm going to just go back to the same thing. And therefore then, as a parallel, I'm really not growing and being effective as a disciple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hence that it outflows into being a discipler,
Yes.
which is another whole thing.
Yes.
I'm thinking again, going back to the Israelites, how I do need the manna every day,
Yes.
because it doesn't last.
Yes.
Because I know my own frailty.
Yes.
You know, what happened yesterday, and it's not going to fuel me into today.
Yes.
And so even recognizing that in a way is humbling myself
Yes.
before him, because God, my relationship with you is it's so secure, but it's so tenuous from my part
Yes.
that unless I keep going there, I'm just going to frazzle. Yeah.
So we better stop there, because how are we keeping these things ever to 15 minutes? I don't know.
Yeah,
We've gone
no,
to
I don't know.
33 minutes.
Sure.
So since it would be useful to give people a contemplation and a question or something to consider, and maybe to trigger some comments on our YouTube. And we'll try and do this at the end of every video. So what's the one that we have at the end of this one?
Let me look. So it was, do I understand why, as I do this, God effects transformation in my life? So why, as I engage in this rhythm, does stuff begin to change?
Yeah.
Just as we were even talking about this earlier, just a useful little addition from the Bible is read Psalm 73, because it so beautifully models
Yes.
just this whole cycle with him.
Yes.
It's the bomb. Yeah.
Yes.
It's really
That
great.
acknowledging my need, recognizing him as the one who meets my need, humbling myself that I would let him be my need, and then aligning my will to choose that truth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Chapters 1 to 5 in one psalm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Amen.
Cool.
Goodbye.
Bye.